Ladies and gentlemen,
Good evening.
Are you ready?
Okay, here we go.
You're listening to the Deal Room Podcast. Join us as we bring you the inside scoop on business sales and acquisitions. Get across trends in the area and hear the industry's best recount their real-life tips, traps, and experiences. Now, here's your host, Joanna Oakey.
Hi, it's Joanna Oakey here, and welcome back to the Deal Room Podcast, a podcast proudly brought to you by our commercial legal practice, Aspect Legal. Now, today, get ready to be swept away in another insightful episode of our much-loved Innovation series. Let's face it, innovation is the beating heart of every successful business. And in the world of business broking, an industry that shapes the lives of entrepreneurs and business owners as they navigate the thrilling realm of buying and selling businesses, innovation becomes an absolute game changer. In this episode, we speak with someone that is very much across business, innovation, and his profession, dentistry. We are talking to Dr. David Penn, a true Australian innovator. David shares insights from his career, which include dentistry, but also his history in building Southern Cross Dental Labs, which was valued at $95 million at exit, playing a fundamental role with Invisalign in Australia, establishing Penn College in 2014, and his involvement and ownership in other non-dental businesses, including Lowe's Menswear. David in this episode shares with us the absolute importance and advantage that focusing on a niche can create for your business, any business, not just dentists, but also the power of diversification within your niche. He shares real-life examples of the way he's approached innovation and entrepreneurship to invest in R&D and new ventures. He has some absolutely fascinating views on why you shouldn't necessarily aim for 100%. And he also talks about the approach to risk, research, metrics, and timing when it comes to innovation. This was an absolutely amazing conversation about innovation that I just can't wait to share with you all. So tune in right here, right now for another episode of the Deal Room Podcast with our special guest, Dr. David Penn. David, I just want to say an absolutely massive thank you for coming on the podcast. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. It's great to be here.
Well, pleasure is all mine. I'm so excited about the discussion today. Now, one of the things that I really wanted to talk to you about is this concept of niching for success versus diversification, because, you're obviously in a niche. You're in dental, you're a dentist involved in Invisalign, but you said to dentists when we're on the Buy, Grow, Exit summit a few weeks ago, one of the things that I picked up on that you said that I thought was really interesting, you said to dentists that you need to differentiate. Unless you can, you're going to have an average life. I thought that was a fabulous comment. But at the same time, I have noticed, David, this interesting thing that you're also quite diversified. So you're involved with Lowe's, with Penn University, with robotics, with vaccines. I mean, that seems quite diversified from my perspective. So tell me, what are your thoughts about this concept of niching for differentiation versus diversification?
Yeah, well, it really is an interesting one, because I think when the dentists graduate from university, they're not really encouraged to sort of think outside the square. They're given a cookie cutter solutions in almost every realm, and they're discouraged to take risks. They don't want to be making errors. They don't want to be making mistakes. And so they become very risk averse, very conservative, very hard to change their thinking. And most of the time that when I go and do lectures, they just want this cookie cutter recipe of just tell me from A to Z or 1 to 10 exactly how to do a process. Now, if I throw a red herring in there, and occasionally I do that deliberately in lectures to see if they're listening, and I'll say something absolutely ridiculous. I remember there's one funny one where a few years ago I told them that we were harvesting rocks from the moon to actually put, and the graphite material we're using in crowns. Now, this is preposterous, absolutely preposterous, yet they were all madly writing this stuff down. And even at the end, I was expecting some questions, but they didn't. So all I'm sort of saying is that they're blinkered. They come out of and most dental schools, in fact, all dental schools around the world are like that. Now, the problem with that is then for dentists then to be, how can I sort of say, take on new processes, new services, new techniques, new materials. It's very, very difficult for them. A lot of them will say, no, I learned this and I'm going to continue with that. So to change their thinking is different. So then all of a sudden, if you sort of say to them, well, look, I want you to be involved with laser dentistry. I want you to be involved with TMD therapy. I want you to be involved in treating xerostomia, dry mouth. They panic because they sort of think, well, I haven't been taught this. But for them to go and do enough education to become confident in that is very difficult. But if we can get them to transcend into one of these niches, where nobody else in that particular area has got that skill set, they've differentiated themselves into a whole new cohort of patients. And all of a sudden, the chance for the practice to grow, if they market themselves properly, is great. So I think that for a dentist who's working full time and hasn't got a lot of time like I do, I think what you were sort of saying, the fact that I am diversified amongst my niches, is because as I've gotten older and I've got to do less clinical time, I've got more time to think about all the problems that I've seen in dentistry for the last 40 years. And once you're aware of the problem, then you've got the ability, or at least to be able to think about how can I solve that problem. But so I've got a lot of time on my hands. Mine is unusual. And then perhaps my inquisitive mind, I like to sort of go and look at new things. And then when I see opportunity there, then I'll dig down even sort of further. But I think for the general dentist who's working 4 days a week or 30 to 40 hours per week, perhaps chairside, I think to go into these niches, these individual niches, one at a time, is absolutely a wonderful way for them to differentiate themselves and build a profit center, a new profit center in their practice. And we did that with Invisalign, and I've seen it with a number of things in dentistry over the years.
Yeah, and of course, you're talking about dentistry right now, but I think the message is so absolutely applicable to all businesses. And that's the point, right? You know, your Southern Cross Dental wasn't a dental practice. It was a supplier to the dental industry.
Well, I think, Joanna, the thing that's interesting with the laboratory side is that we were pushing new techniques and new materials all the time. So we were lucky. We were working with an academic institution, Hong Kong University in particular, where their academics and PhD students were pushing the limits, and we were watching that. And every time we saw something, we thought, well, hey, we can introduce this to the marketplace there. So yeah, that was fantastic. But and I see in other businesses, I've got a lot of friends. I do mentoring with a lot of people in different businesses. I see the same sort of thing, is that they're a lot of them are unwilling to look at new technology, new techniques, new materials. When they do, a lot of time they don't really know how to integrate it properly, and that takes time. They've got to have a risk appetite. They've got to be careful not to make it too capital intensive, because I often see people who throw a lot of money at things and thinking, well, the more money I throw at it, the better it's going to be. And we talk a lot about using sweat equity. And that's what I really like. I said to say to somebody, if you can do it yourself, it might take a bit longer, but your risk profile is completely different. So I'd rather you do the research rather than going outsourcing this or outsourcing that. Obviously, there's some things you have to outsource, but I think it's a fundamental problem with a lot of businesses is they don't project towards the future. I think one of the greatest mottos is in 3M, the Minnesota Mining and Manufacturing Company, monstrous corporation. I'm sure you're well aware of. And their mantra is that they said that in 5 years from now, that 40% of their sales want to be in products they haven't thought of yet.
Wow.
Now, when you stop and think about that, imagine you as a lawyer thinking, gee, what am I going to be doing in 5 years from now, where 40% of my revenue through my legal practice is going to be in what? I'm going to go into strata law. I'm going to go into, I don't know what I'm going to do, but can you imagine that? So that to me is the true sort of face of innovation, where you're backing yourself and you say, I'm continually looking for opportunity. And you've got the other ones, which of course, which reach tipping point, which become things that are fundamental in certain marketplaces. there's sandpaper, there's sticky tape, there are adhesives. You've got so many different parts of 3M, and they might try 10. 3 might stick, 4 might be a maybe, 3 might go down the toilet. That doesn't matter. But it's those three stellar performers, and they've added to the to the armamentarium of the business. And I think that applies, is applicable to in every single business. And at Lowe's, we're doing that all the time. We're looking for niches all the time.
And so what's an example of that, David? What's an example of it, Lowe's, a sort of niche?
Traditionally, Lowe's has been a menswear business, and then they were involved in schoolwear. And Lowe's supplies more than 1,200 schools around Australia. But then they got into workwear. And workwear, for instance, high-vis products. That's a massive industry for the construction industry and for many other areas. Then you've got big men's. Now, big men's, you sort of think, well, hang on, what's that? Well, there's a lot of guys in Australia, not just Australia, but around the world, who might be 4XL or 6XL. Not everybody has got access to those clothes. So that's another niche. And there's corporate wear. If we want to go and supply uniforms to a large corporation, fantastic. So we're looking for these type of niches. Now, actually, we're looking at scrubs for medical practices and for dental practices. So these are the type of things where we encourage the buyers to look for opportunity across the board.
And so are you saying there that that your recommendation to those smaller practices is to find their first niche, but as they grow, it's to constantly build on that diversification of multiple niches. So still niching, but just multiple niches.
Exactly. When you talk about the 3M model, if they're adding one of these niches per year, then you're going to find in 5 years from now, they're going to have 5 niches. And if they only had room for 15 or 20 niches, then 20 to 33% of their business is totally different than the way that it was 5 years ago. Now, to me, that is the way that business constantly evolving. You don't always get it right, but you need to be looking at. So you need to encourage people in the practice to take some degree of risk. And as I said, in our organisation here and at Southern Cross and at Lowe's, we say to people, if you're not making a few mistakes, you're not taking enough risk.
I love that. I think that's so true, right?
It is true, because you really got to think to yourself, if you're getting everyone right, it means you're not taking enough risk and you're not really stretching the envelope really far enough where you want to go. So, I was talking last night to a group, and I said one day in probably the next 12 months, I'm going to do a presentation of all the monstrous disasters that we had and all the things that we thought were going to be fantastic that were just they're just complete failures, and what the reason was and how we, because it's interesting, because those things I think are really fun to reflect upon and say, well, what went wrong? Did we misread the market? Was the technology usurped easily? What was the reason why it failed? And each time that we do fail, it sort of just adds a little notch in my brain somewhere to say, don't forget to look at that particular one because you failed there before. And that's happened to me on a myriad of occasions. For every success we've had, we've probably had, almost 1-to-1 failure rate, or relative failure rate where something has failed to thrive. And I've seen this in dental practices. I've seen it in legal practice. I've got a lot of friends who are lawyers. I've seen them specialised to the nth degree, and where they're almost like, this is great, you're a specialist in this particular area of. I've got one in construction and finance law, a really good friend of mine. He wrote a book about it, but he wrote it from the developer's perspective, and it's like so niche, it's too niche. And it's like, well, I said, well, think of all the hours you spent writing this great book, and I can understand it, which is great. But the problem is, how many actual people in construction would take the time? What's the size of your target market? You haven't actually reflected on that. So was there any commercial metrics, which were applicable from day one? Great book, but over niche.
Let's talk about that then, David. I love that. I love that because I think, so one of the things that you've talked about, obviously, don't be afraid to fail, but there has to be a point when you call it. There has to be a point where you say, okay, well, that's an idea that didn't work. That's a niche that didn't work. Let's move on to the next one. So maybe can we talk about what are those factors to think about to make sure your niche testing is leading you in the right direction rather than encouraging you to spend too much time focusing constantly on things maybe that aren't working.
That's a really good point, and that's a difficult one because ego comes into it, and a lot of people are going to sort of say are reluctant, and especially when we do a lot of work in research and development, and you can't have an ego in R&D. Because today's great product can be tomorrow's garbage. And we work with plenty of people who can't give that up. They're emotionally invested and they can't pivot from one thing to another. So it's the type, not everybody's suited for this, don't get me wrong. I think, though, if you do certain market research, and as far as dentistry is concerned, I guess there's two things. You can do things which are on the fringe, where people are already sort of looking at this. You might look to other markets. You might look to the US or to the European markets who may be somewhat technologically more advanced in some areas, and you can take heed of what's going on there and you can try those things. I think clinical trials are always an interesting way to do things. And I think one of the most important things is always assessing the target market. And I think a lot of people tend to kid themselves about, I've just made a new pen and everybody in Australia is going to buy it. So guess what? I can make $1.50 from every pen. And I know there's 27 million people in Australia and I do the numbers and that's what I'm going to make. Now, that's just ridiculous. That's fantasy land. On the other hand, you get the doomsday sayers who say, oh, guess what? My pen, it might be toxic and, there might be things in there and there might be nanoparticles. If I hear that word one more time, I'm going to scream. Everybody, nanoparticles, everything. I mean, it's just ridiculous. But it's so you've got the two ends of the spectrum. You've got the one who's looking at the target market and doing the metrics, which are ridiculous, where it's ridiculously optimistic. And then you've got the ultimate pessimist. And then you've got somewhere in between who's the realist. So, I mean, it's very, very hard to look at yourself in the mirror and say, what am I? I mean, if I ask you the question, what are you? Are you an optimist, a pessimist, or a realist? What would you say?
I'm definitely an optimist.
You are. Well, that's great because, in fact, my wife talks about that a lot at Lowe's because she says often one of the best things that she does is she says yes first and then she'll figure out a way to do it later, which I think is great. But I've got other people I work with, on the other hand, who immediate reaction is, oh, gee, no, I don't think that's going to work. It's too dangerous. It's too risky, all that sort of stuff. So I think it depends very much on the individual then about when you're going to pull the plug and when you're going to start to pivot away from something that's not looking favorable. But I think if you do your due diligence first off, then you get a couple of people who you trust around you to sort of say, like we're looking at a device at the moment. I've asked 5 people this week how much they would pay for the device. And it's a laser type of device. It's a really interesting one. And I've had reactions between $500 and $10,000 for the same device. Now, so then it's interesting. So then when you talk about making a call of whether to pull the plug on something, if I said it was going to cost me $250 to produce that, and the person at 500 is closer to being correct, or you think the person at 10,000 is closer to being correct, you're going to make a call. Do you average it? Do you get more market research? All of those type of things. More information that you can get, the better, as long as the information is coming from people who are credible. And I think you've got to be careful because, sometimes if you get a pessimistic people around you, they can color your judgment and they can turn you away from things. It's like the classic examples, like they say, you know what, 97% of patients are going to be happy with this procedure. And I've seen this happen many times in the courses that I've taught, where people say, oh, we can't do that because 3% of patients will be unhappy. And they'll actually turn away from it because they think it has to be 100% right. Now, I don't know if you remember that famous quote from Stormin Norman Schwarzkopf, the American general. And this is an interesting one, a takeaway. I was taught this a while ago. He said that when you make a decision, you should collect 70% of the data that's available. And this is what he was doing in war times. And he said that the other 30%, you go on gut instinct. The interesting part, he said, is because the time that would take you to collect the other 30% of the data, the remaining data, the opportunity is gone. Now, that's quite an interesting one because I've got many friends. I've got one friend who's a lawyer, actually, and she's one of these people who will only make a decision when she's got 100% of the data. Now, you think about that, how many times you've made recommendations to your clients and you thought, well, I could research that a little bit more, but I've got 4 ideas and I've got blah, 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 blah. Now, this girl would go and get 20 different opinions on things, and she wouldn't make a call until she's basically looked at absolutely everything. Now, the client on the other end is worried about being sued, waiting for some advice from you, and this other girl's taken a month because she's done so much research, yet you've got back to her in 2 days. Now, what's going to be more commercially successful? 1 time out of 50, you might be wrong, and the other one might be wrong 0 times out of 50. But from a commercial perspective, Joanna's going to do way better than this other lady because you've been commercially pragmatic. So I don't think you can ever get it 100% correct. I think you'd be stupid to think that it's a lay down misère. There's risk in everything. But again, the Schwarzkopf thing is really interesting. That 70-30 rule, he calls it. And he used it in wartime. Then when we do a strike, we know a lot about what's happening, but we don't know it all.
Well, look, David, I just want to say a huge thank you for being on the podcast today. Such fascinating discussions between this concept of niching, multiple niching, to the point where you maybe differentiate, you're diversifying through multiple niches. But look, and if our listeners want to connect with you, how can they go about doing that?
Just email me. That's the best way. Even at my age, I know how to use email. It's easy.
Do you really want us to put a link in our show notes, David, to your email? I feel like you could be peppered.
Really, as I sort of said, I do a lot of mentoring and I really enjoy this. And I like working with, motivated people. And if they've got ideas and things and how to traverse from concept to commercialization, is that I sort of do a lot of that sort of thing. And I guide them through what I call the valley of death, when they're getting close to it, they don't really know. There's all the regulatory stuff. There's so many things. So I'm really happy to talk to people. And as I'm getting older, I find that I'm enjoying this even more and more because I've been involved in so many different types of things. It's fascinating. But as you sort of said, the principles generally are quite the same across most. And so I'm really delighted if they want to sort of email me and say, I've got this crazy idea, what do you think? And I'll give it to you straight between the eyes. It won't be sugar-coated.
Oh, David, I love it. I just want to say thank you, a huge thank you for coming on to the podcast today.
Pleasure.
Well, that's it for this episode of the Deal Room podcast. We hope you're now primed for your next deal with these pointers and have enjoyed these fascinating insights. Now, if you'd like more information about this topic, then head over to our website at thedealroompodcast.com, where you'll be able to download a transcript of this episode, as well as access any contact details and any other additional information we referred to in today's podcast. Now, if you'd like to get in contact with our guests today and the services they offer, you can go ahead and check out our show notes for a link right through to them and their details. You can also book in directly with our legal eagles at Aspect Legal if you'd like to soundboard your next steps, discuss a legal question, or find out more how we can assist, whether that's with buying or selling a business, or perhaps somewhere in between. Now, don't forget to subscribe to the Deal Room podcast on your favourite podcast player to get notifications whenever a new episode is out. We'd also love to hear your feedback, so please leave us a review and rating if you're already one of our subscribers, or even if you're listening to this podcast for the very first time. Every review helps our team produce valuable content for you. Well, thanks again for listening in. You've been listening to Joanna Oakey and the Deal Room Podcast, a podcast proudly brought to you by our commercial legal practice, Aspect Legal. See you next time. Have you heard of Aspect Legal's partner program? Our partner program is a free program that's open to brokers, corporate advisors, accountants, and any other advisors to businesses who are dealing with organisations that are leading into a sale or acquisition of businesses or shares. As part of our partner program, we offer free access to our legal hotline, which is a support line to our specialist lawyers. We also provide a free sale legal review to buyers and sellers, where we educate them about the process and timelines from a legal perspective. And the third element that forms part of this partner program is a match-up database that we run, where effectively we're able to connect up accountants or brokers or corporate advisors with businesses who are looking to either sell or acquire. So if you're a partner of ours, you go straight into that partner database, and where we can see opportunities to provide matchups, then we introduce you. And the final element of our partner program is ongoing education in the form of seminars, webinars, and meetups. So if you're not a partner, then all you need to do to become a partner is just pop us an email at partners@aspectlegal.com.au and just simply say in your subject column, I want to become a partner. It's as easy as that to get immediate access to our free legal hotline and all of those other resources. We look forward to having you on board as a partner.
Ladies and gentlemen.
That will conclude this evening's entertainment.
Thanks for listening to the Deal Room Podcast. To find out more about this episode and other episodes in the series, check out the show notes or head over to our website at thedealroompodcast.com.au.